Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. With me today is Daniel McAdams, and it's nice to see you today, Daniel.
Good to see you, Dr. Paul.
Good. I'd like to follow up on our previous discussions regarding the tragedy in Paris and the killing of so many people, because the reactions have been very, very strong. We have to bomb somebody. And even one presidential candidate said, bomb away, because even if you have to kill some civilians, it's okay. So there's a bit of extremism as a result of this on what to do. Of course, we've made the argument that our intervention and the bombing and the killing, over many, many years, for instance, since 9/11, our involvement in the Middle East, we have participated in the killing of about 3 million Muslims. So there's been a lot of killing. And then they said that the French have said this is an act of war. They want to declare war. It's difficult to declare war against a non-country, but they still want to declare war. But in some ways, the war was declared already by our side and by our president when Assad had to go. So the French have been involved in this, to do this all along, and been very much involved in the military. But just recently, there was an article on Zero Hedge. They asked an interesting question. They didn't give a complete answer on this particular article. And they says, are we bombing the wrong country? Assuming that, those who want to bomb are going to bomb Syria. And they, accelerated, and the French went in there and started bombing. And I think we have a chart here that shows, an indication of where the support may be coming from, from the tweets and through Twitter. I'm not sure how that system all works, but the numbers clearly point out that there were a lot of support was coming from Saudi Arabia. Can anybody believe this? So do you think that maybe our allies and the French are bombing the wrong country? Or could it be that maybe we should recognize that bombing hasn't been a very good help to us, and maybe we should choose to bomb no country at all?
Yeah, it's funny, after this attack in Paris, the French immediately started bombing parts of Syria. They bombed the headquarters of ISIS, supposedly in Syria. The U.S. finally bombed some of these trucks that were smuggling oil, so it seems to have been a green light to do things that you wonder why they didn't do before. But the other thing that you mentioned about France that's interesting is right afterwards, now they're about to pass their own Patriot Act, so they're following our footsteps. But as to the Saudis, think about how complex Saudi society is. There are probably a lot of ISIS supporters who are also disgusted with the regime, too, for a number of reasons, on the sort of right or left, if you look at it this way. And ISIS has, even though they've been sponsored by Saudi Arabia, they have said some things like they want to take down the Saudi regime.
Well, I think Saudi Arabia gets a free ride. I think my guess would be if you went to the American people, who frequently aren't well informed, would probably say, oh yeah, they're our friends, and we work with them, and they're an ally, and they weren't pro-Soviets and this sort of thing. They certainly were an ally when trying to get the Soviets out of Afghanistan. But they don't get criticized very much. We can be pretty harsh on anybody from the Chinese to any other country that we're doing business with, and it's okay to criticize them. I don't like all the deals they say. If you violate any civil liberties in your country, then you're a very bad person. But that never comes up. I don't think Saudi Arabia qualifies as a country that understands what civil liberties even means.
No, not at all. And if we were just talking about the foreign policy too, you think about this tragedy in France, 100 and some people were killed, but the Saudis have unleashed a war of aggression against Yemen, where the equivalent of 20 Paris attacks at least, and then you adjust for a proportion of population, and you have a horrific crime that nobody is saying anything about. On the contrary, we just saw today that the U.S. is going to sell them another $1.3 billion worth of bombs to drop on the poor Yemenis.
Yeah, and there's never been criticism directed toward the Saudis on their involvement in in one way or another in participating in the growth of the radical Islam. For instance, we were very blatant about what we were doing, at least we know now what we were doing in Afghanistan. But we did that with a close ally of Afghanistan. They said, oh no, that was just Osama bin Laden. But no, there were a lot of weapons and things. And then the radicalization, the madrasa schools that were in Saudi Arabia, in which we justify and say, well, that's good. That is not exactly our way, but this will help us defeat the Soviets. So it was anti-Soviet that we were willing to do this, never saying, well, the Mujahideen was necessary to get rid of the Soviets. Nobody said, well, this could morph into the Taliban, and maybe the Taliban might resent us if we decide we want to take over Afghanistan. But there doesn't seem to be any criticism directed toward Saudi Arabia. A little bit more now, there's more questioning, but over the years, I don't think there's been very much analysis, really.
I'm reminded of the quote by Zbigniew Brzezinski, who supposedly is the architect of the Mujahideen using them to overthrow the Soviets via Afghanistan. And I can't say the quote exactly, but he said something like, What's the big deal about creating a few radical jihadists when the prize is overthrowing the Soviet Empire?
Yeah, and I heard him say that in recent years, within months. So he has stuck to that. So they have been very much involved, and we've had deals with the Saudis since World War II. You provide us the oil, and we'll provide the cash, and we'll protect you and give you military protection. But it looks to me like the perpetual wealth machine is running out, and that's why people in Saudi are getting disturbed. They have poverty in Saudi Arabia, believe it or not. Even with all that oil, there's 25% live in total poverty. There's a significant number of Shia that aren't happy with the Sunni leadership, and so there is turmoil there. And how they've held people less rich than the royal families would be just to pass out welfare. And that was fine when oil was over, especially when it was over $100 a barrel. But the Soviets, to protect their own interests and their military empire too as well, they decided to get rid of some of their competition. They didn't like fracking that we were doing. They didn't like the Russians. So they, deliberately pumped oil out and brought the price down, never realizing that the economy may well turn down, and all of a sudden the oil price is low, and they're in financial trouble right now, believe it or not, and it is of concern to them. They still have the money in the bank. They still have oil in the ground, but they are not the superpower financially that they once were, and this, of course, is a threat to our militarism in that area, as well as to our military-industrial complex. I see that we build the weapons, we sell the weapons to the Saudis, and they distribute them in many ways, over the last decade or so.
Look how much they've distributed to the radicals in Syria. It almost seems like Saudi Arabia is a country undergoing a slow-motion suicide, and there's probably a cautionary tale for us in this. As their grip in the region weakens, they're lashing out militarily. We've talked about Yemen, we've talked about Syria, don't forget Iraq, and there's even some speculation, the Russians have admitted now that a bomb took down the plane. I even saw a piece today speculating that the Saudis may have had a hand in it. Yeah. So they're getting much more aggressive overseas. As you say, the tightening of the budget at home, the cash crunch is coming together. It's almost like a mini U.S. We should keep an eye on what they're doing.
Direct military intervention seems to have been more recent with Yemen. They were involved with weaponry and support and money and this sort of thing. But they certainly were on the side of the United States when Obama said Assad must go. They were very supportive of that, and they remain that way. But there seems to be an alliance that's not talked about so much, and like I say, I don't think they've talked a whole lot about how much Saudi Arabia is involved. But what about the coalition between the United States, Saudi Arabia, and Israel? I mean, I don't know if many Americans would say, well, what do you think the relationship is between Saudi Arabia, and we either wouldn't know or wouldn't think much of it. But does it seem to you like there's a pretty close coalition? I mean, how often would the three of them be on opposite ends? I mean, if Assad has to go, they seem to agree. If we have to do something in Afghanistan like we did, they seem to agree. I imagine the Iraq War might have been the same way too.
Yeah, I think it's kind of a marriage of convenience between Saudi Arabia and Israel. They both have the same goals in the region, which is to prevent Shia Islam from getting the upper hand in the Middle East. And that's one of the reasons, on one hand, you see the Saudis training and equipping al-Qaeda, and then you'll see al-Qaeda, al-Nusra in Syria. When they're wounded, they're taken over into Israel and treated in Israeli hospitals as a matter of routine. So they share common goals in the Middle East.
See, I think what happens is they get overconfident. Some people will say that, no, the chaos there is deliberate, because some people thrive on chaos, and some people know how to thrive on chaos, whether it was deliberate or not. But I think these are unintended consequences. I believe what has gone on in the past is that they could subtly control things, and the Saudis didn't have to send soldiers, and nobody had to know much what they're doing. But now it was assumed that maybe the Yemen war would be over rather quickly. I imagine a lot of people thought, with everybody piling on Assad, the one thing they didn't ask, yes, there were some Syrians that didn't like Assad, but it looks like there's still a lot of Syrians that like Assad. So that was, and think of how much force was used to try to get rid of Assad. They probably thought that was going to be over rather quickly. Some of those other so-called revolutions in the Middle East and Northern Africa, they went rather quickly, and our side was able to get rid of certain leaders. But this one doesn't seem to be happening. This to me looks like an unplanned event and an unintended consequence, and Saudis now up against this policy that's not working so well.
Well, what happened with the U.S. is they believe their own propaganda. There's no way, if Assad was not genuinely popular in Syria, that he could have survived these 4 years in power. But they believe this idea that if you foment an uprising, people will come along with you. But the Saudis haven't gotten the message, nor did the UK. I just saw yesterday that the UK has announced they're going to start training the Free Syrian Army in Saudi Arabia, going to go back to square one and try the whole thing over again that they've been doing for 4 years to overthrow the Syrian government.
Our suggestion on the title is Saudi Arabia, a friend or a foe. I think it's a good choice, because I think friendship is a good idea. But there's different kinds of friendship, pseudo-friendship and real friendship. And right now we don't have that option. True friendship certainly doesn't mean that we're subsidizing people and giving them weapons and we're military allies and all this. And a foe means that we have to attack them or something. So I would say for America, for the United States and our citizens, our policies are not friendly to the American people and not friendly to our financial situation or our national defense.
Yeah, or our safety, exactly.
Right. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today, and I would like to just briefly say that we'll hear more about Saudi Arabia. They're under the gun financially, they're in a mess militarily, and things aren't going well, whether it's in Syria or in Yemen, and something will have to give. Yes, there have been unintended consequences, and there is blowback involved now, and of course the whole idea of are our allies bombing the right country, and have we been bombing the right country? No, we have not, and there's not a right country. Nobody in that region has attacked the United States of America. Our national security has never been challenged. We have not had a need to have a real declaration of war that would permit such events of bombing. So yes, the wrong countries are being bombed because we are participant, whether it's the French that are doing it right now, they're our allies, and most of the time NATO is behind this. It's our money, and it's always a drain on the American people. And right now, because of this horrific event, in Paris. The talk now is you have to sacrifice more liberties, you know, and the neocons are ripe for that. And believe me, they are saying it's going to come here, it's going to come here, justifying even more destructions of our liberties here at home and more expenditures on the military. They still claim that the military budget has been slashed, which is a lie. They have not slashed the American military budget. So we need to wake up and look at the facts, and I think looking more closely at Saudi Arabia might help reveal exactly where some of our problems are coming from in the Middle East. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today to the Liberty Report, and please come back soon.